Hello teacher. Hello students. Welcome to today's lesson on foreign terms of payment with a special emphasis on consignment sales. In our previous lesson, we have seen about one of the foreign terms of payments, that is payment on collection. Particularly, we have discussed about bill of exchange or draft. Let me remind you some of the main points of our previous lesson. Payments on collections offer a middle-of-the-road approach to satisfying both the exporter and importer. The payment of drafts or bill of exchange on a collection basis can be subdivided into three categories: sight draft, time draft, and clean draft. Let's begin today's lesson with the third foreign terms of payments, which is consignment sales. As you may recall, the first two have been discussed in the previous episode. With consignment sales, the seller does not receive payment until the importer sells or resells the goods. Students, let's discuss the procedures involved in consignment sales. This is a method in which the exporter or seller sends the product to an importer or consignee on a deferred payment basis. That is, the importer does not pay for the merchandise until it is sold to a third party. The consignor, meaning the seller, ships goods to the consignee to sell. With consignment sales, the seller does not receive payment until the importer sells or resells the goods. This is a method in which the exporter sends the product to an importer on a deferred payment basis. The product stays with the importer until all the terms of the sale have been satisfied. When the consignee sells the merchandise to a third party or buyer, the consignee becomes obligated to pay the consignor from the proceeds of the sale of the merchandise. In the consignment method, the importer is called the consignee, and he or she is responsible for paying for the goods when they are sold. The consignee receives a fee or commission for making the sale. If the consignee does not sell the goods after all, he or she may return them to the consignor without obligation. Now I want you to do the following exercise individually. You have 2 minutes. What is the difference between consignment and sales? Did you answer the question? Good. Let's now provide you the answer so that you can compare it with your responses. Following are the points of difference between consignment and sales. 1. Ownership. Consignment. Ownership is not transferred to the consignee and it remains with the consignor. Sales. Ownership passes to the buyer. 2. Relationship. Consignment. Relationship between consignor and consignee is that of principal and agent. Sales. Buyer is the debtor of seller until his account is settled. 3. Risk of damages. Consignment. Consignee holds the goods at the risk of the consignor, so any damage to the goods is a loss to the consignor. Sales. Any damage to the goods is the loss of the buyer. 4. Return of goods. Consignment. The consignee may return the goods to the consignor if not sold. Sales. Goods once sold are generally not returned. The payment mechanism adopted depends on a number of factors, which are usually taken into account when the underlying commercial contract is negotiated. Factors include the amount of trust that the exporter and importer have in each other, the creditworthiness of the buyer, the bargaining power of the respective parties, conditions imposed by a third party, example, credit insurer, import or export regulations in certain countries. However, the most commonly used payment used in Ethiopia is letter of credit, which is criticized to be very cumbersome. Students, do you think there is a risk associated with the method of consignment? Yes, there is a risk associated with consignment method of payment. Consignment is rarely used between unrelated parties. For example, independent exporters and importers. There are several advantages and risks of the own consignment payment method. These advantages and risks are illustrated as follows. Risks associated with consignment. The consignor faces the biggest risks under a consignment agreement. For one, the consignor will not receive any money until part or all of the consigned stock has been sold. Secondly, the consignor does not have control over consignee's willingness to pay for the goods. The consignee is advantageous because payment is remitted only when the goods are not sold. In comparison, the consignee is risk-free. Now that you've understood some general facts about consignment payment method, let's discuss specific advantages to consignor and consignee. It allows a seller or manufacturer to place merchandise in wholesale and retail outlets for additional exposure to the buying market. It can provide an incentive for the wholesaler and retailer to stock goods in inventory because their capital is not tied up in inventory. Consignment selling allows the consignee or seller to offer new products without a high initial outlay of cash. Consignment payment puts pricing power in the hands of the consignor. In deciding whether or not to use consignment selling, you need to look at the disadvantages. While your merchandise is being exposed on the shelves of a wholesaler or retailer, you get no money until they sell. As the manufacturer, you must have enough cash on hand to wait extended periods for payments of merchandise sold. Since the goods are out of your physical control, you cannot control the damage and shopper abuse which inventory merchandise is generally subject to. Even though these advantages are there, it is best used in cases involving an increasing demand for a product for which a proportioned stock is required to meet such a need. It is also used when a seller wants to market new products or tests the market in a new country. Now I want you to do the following exercise by discussing with the student sitting next to you. You have 2 minutes. Discuss the reason why consignment is the least desirable form of selling and receiving payment for the exporter, and how this risk can be minimized. Students, did you answer the question? Well, let's now do the activity together. The problems associated with this method include the following: delays in payment, buyer bears little or no risk, and payment to seller is delayed until the goods are sold to a third party. Risk of non-payment. Even though title to the goods does not pass until payment is made, the seller has to acquire possession of merchandise to sell in the importer's country or ship back to the home country in the event of non-payment. Cost of returning merchandise. If there is limited success in selling the product, there is a need to ship it back to the exporter. It is costly to arrange for the return of merchandise that is unsold. Limited sales effort by importers. Importers may not be highly motivated to sell merchandise on consignment because their money is not tied up in inventory. In view of these risks, consignment sales should be used with overseas customers that have extremely good credit ratings and are well known to the exporter. Now I want you to do the following exercise by discussing with the student sitting next to you. You have 2 minutes. Discuss the procedures involved in consignment sales. Students, did you answer the question? Well, let me provide you the answer so that you can compare it with your responses. The consignor consigns goods to consignee and incurs expenses in sending the goods to consignee. The consignee will try to sell the goods either for cash or on credit. Consignee will get commission as remuneration of his services. The consignee becomes obligated to pay the consignor from the proceeds of the sale of the merchandise. Let me wind up today's discussion by summarizing the main points. Today, we have learned about some important foreign terms of payment with emphasis on consignment sales. Basically, we have discussed procedures and risks involved in consignment sales. Goods on consignment are goods shipped by the owner, called the consignor, to another party, the consignee. A consignee sells goods for the owner. The consignor continues to own the consigned goods. In our next lesson, we will discuss ways of entering international trade. This brings us to the end of our lesson today. See you next time in another program. Until then, goodbye, teacher. Goodbye, students.